Slashaholics. This is David Bergantino, author of the book Wes Craven's New Nightmare, the Bard's Blood Horror Shakespeare series, and the writer-designer of the upcoming horror video game Return, One Way Trip. You're listening to the 80s slasher librarian's narration of my books in the Freddy Krueger's Tales of Terror series. Prepare to be scared.
I can't sleep tonight, 'cause I gotta run, gotta hide, and I'm running from this nightmare. I turn around, but there's no one there, and I'm running from this nightmare, running from this nightmare. Can't sleep tonight, 'cause I gotta run, gotta hide, and I'm running from this nightmare. I turn around, but there's no one there, and I'm running from this nightmare, running from this nightmare.
And now the conclusion of Freddy Krueger's Tales of Terror, Deadly Disguise by David Bergantino. Chapter 10. Now this is a real drag, Vanessa thought. Waiting patiently for something to happen had never been her strong suit. She was used to making things happen, fast. But according to Ron's plan for the evening, there was nothing for her to do except light the candle Ron had placed in her room and keep it burning until his evening's chores were completed. To his credit, Ron had executed his plan flawlessly. Having tipped off the guards that the blackout was a planned event, as a way of keeping the party from running too late, he had told them, the mansion had emptied out quickly. The last 3 stragglers were now getting into their car. One of them, she noted from her third-story window, was that Rachel girl, Jack's old flame. "Sorry, honey," Vanessa purred at the window. "Your little bathtub buddy is going bye-bye real soon." Almost as if the girl could hear her, Rachel turned and looked right up at the window at Vanessa. Vanessa stepped back a little unnerved by the knowledge that she had been caught. But of course Rachel hadn't heard her. That was impossible. In the dark, the other girl probably hadn't even seen her. Still, it was a creepy little scene. Vanessa sat back on her bed now, keeping the candle burning, because that was all she could do. Her heart gave a little flutter of delight when she heard a car drive off. No doubt Rachel was finally gone, and now they were alone. Just her, Ron, and Jack. But where exactly were they, she wondered. Ron had said he'd come up to her room as soon as everyone was gone, so they could go over their plans. I hope he hurries, Vanessa thought. All this time alone, sitting with the candle in the dark, when you're used to being out beneath the neon of Hollywood, was quite boring, and more than a little scary. Not long ago, she had heard someone shouting for help. At first, she'd thought it must be some dim-witted party guest frightened by Jack's playrooms, but the sound had come from another direction. Then came several solid thumps, like someone banging a rock against a wall. That, too, had stopped. It reminded Vanessa that the mansion was actually supposed to be haunted. That was nonsense, she told herself. Nonetheless, she wanted Ron to hurry. Her willingness to keep the candle burning for him was waning. Unfortunately, sleep wasn't an option at the moment either. To her jet-lagged system, it was still only early evening in L.A., so she had no choice but to keep the candle... The candle! Its light had been growing brighter. Not neon bright, of course, but Vanessa could see more details in her room. And behind the scent of the candle, thoughtful Ron had brought her a cinnamon votive, was another less pleasant odor. Rotten eggs. Without thinking, Vanessa leaped at the candle and brought her flattened palm down on the flame, snuffing it. Yelping in pain, she brought her burned hand to her mouth. Cursing herself, she sucked on her palm. Wax broke off into Vanessa's mouth, and she spat it out. The air was now scented with the potpourri of cinnamon, smoke, rotten eggs, and burnt flesh. She studied the candle to make sure the wick was completely out. If not for the scent of the candle, she would have recognized the smell of leaking gas a lot sooner. And if she hadn't noticed, it had been a stroke of providence that the candle had started burning brighter, as it burned off the gas that was seeping into the air. There was no staying put any longer now. She had to find Ron and Jack, she loathed to admit, for it was too soon to dispose of him. She had to get all of them out of the mansion. Before Vanessa reached her door, a light appeared underneath it. "Ron?" she called and threw open the door. No one was there. Stepping out, she saw the light disappearing around a corner. "Jack?" she called out more uncertainly. Whoever had the flashlight was moving away. She ran toward it. Rounding the corner, she saw it in the distance, but could not see who was holding it. "Who is there?" Vanessa called out. The flashlight stopped and turned, shining toward her. Vanessa couldn't even make out a figure. "There's a gas leak," she yelled, not caring who it was. "It's happened before in this house. We have to get out of here." She started forward again. To Vanessa's relief, the light remained in one place. But just as she got close enough to almost catch a glimpse of who she was shouting at, the figure turned and ran off. "Hey, come back, you moron!" she yelled. She was never in the mood for games, but this was the worst. Rounding yet another corner, Vanessa saw the light down the hall. This time it was shining on the floor, out of a doorway ahead. "Don't run off, whoever you are," Vanessa called out. "I'm trying to be nice to you." Vanessa stopped running and approached the light carefully. "Can't you smell it?" She tried to sound calm, conversational, but she suddenly realized how scared she actually was. "The jury has reached a verdict, Your Honor. They say I am scared out of my wits." Vanessa reached the doorway, beyond which was not a room but a small landing. And this time the flashlight did not move, because this time no one was holding it. It lay on the top step of what appeared to be a back staircase. Frustrated by the disappearance of her mystery person, Vanessa picked up the flashlight. "Well, looks like I'm on my own," she said aloud. "I'm going to save myself." Pointing the flashlight down the stairs, she thought this seemed to be as good a way to get out as any. "Have to go down before I can get out anyway," she concluded. And Ron wasn't kidding when he said the place filled up with gas quickly. I wonder what moron accidentally turned it on. Vanessa started down the stairs. On the first step, her foot slipped on the carpeting that covered the stairs, and she had to grab the railing to keep herself from falling. As a result, the flashlight dropped out of her hand and bounced down the stairs. The bulb broke and the stairway became pitch black. Vanessa stood still, waiting for her eyes to adjust. That's when she heard the voice. "Someone's got a secret," came a sinister sing-song from the landing behind Vanessa. She turned but could not see who was there. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice heavy with annoyance. But she couldn't disguise the fear that was now consuming her. She knew exactly what the voice was referring to. "You shouldn't try to pull the rug out from under someone's life," the voice said sinisterly. "You never know when someone might just do it to you first." "What do you want from me?" Vanessa demanded. She was rooted in place, afraid to move. There was murder in that voice. "All I want is this," hissed the voice. "When we meet again, you'll have to tell me how it felt." Vanessa was confused. "What are you— Ah!" The floor moved beneath her feet suddenly, and Vanessa was thrown into the air. This time, her hand never even got close to the railing. In the internal moment before Vanessa's head struck the first wooden step, she realized what had happened. The steps weren't carpeted at all, but someone, the possessor of that sinister voice, had draped a rug over the top steps and pulled the rug out from under Vanessa Chimera. Then the infinite moment ended, and Vanessa's head struck the 5th step from the bottom. A light brighter than all in the neon in Hollywood blazed for an instant. Then it winked out, as did her life. Rachel stopped and listened. The mansion now seemed alive with sounds. Thumps, things sliding across floors, all of it coming from above. All coming from this haunted mansion. Despite the threat of being overwhelmed by gas, she headed toward the source of the sounds. For all she knew, it was Jack, wandering around. With a blow on the head and lungs filled with gas, he might not even know who or where he was. But where was everyone else? Rachel wondered. She had fully expected to run into Vanessa or Ron or the other guests whose cars were still outside. But no one had appeared. No one had answered her calls. What if whoever was left had succumbed to the gas? Dread thicker than the gas permeating the mansion began to envelop her. If I'm the only one conscious, she thought, how can I possibly save everyone? You can't, answered a voice inside of her. There's only one person you can save, guaranteed, and that's yourself. And that's if you get out of the house now. I'm not leaving without trying to find Jack, she said out loud. Besides, somebody's upstairs moving around. I can hear it now. Rachel climbed the stairs that led to the haunted mansion rooms. Gingerly, she pushed open the first door, shining the flashlight ahead of her. Jack? She called out, poking her head in. Is anyone there? There was no answer. She entered the room. With the flashlight, she checked the platform where the guillotine was set up. No one was there, except the fake executioner and the fake, headless victim. Only the victim wasn't the same one she had seen earlier. This one was female. She noted the painted fingernails. And by the looks of it, someone had gone overboard with the blood effects. Gallons appeared to have poured from that stump. It almost made Rachel sick, but she willed her stomach to stop flopping about, and turned away. As she headed for the next room, something like wet hair brushed against her face. Recoiling, she wiped the liquid off her cheek and shined the flashlight to her side. There stood the second executioner, holding out a decapitated head as before. Only this, too, had changed, and somehow it looked familiar. Rachel shined the flashlight right into its face, its mouth open, silently screaming, the sightless eyes staring forward. This time Rachel did gag as she shined the flashlight at the body near the guillotine and then back into the face. They belonged together, a matched set. The head and the body had once been known to Rachel collectively as Vanessa Chimera. Rachel screamed and the world started to spin around her. The combination of shock and a lack of oxygen due to the gas leak nearly did her in. But she forced herself to stumble into the next room. There she flopped down on the platform. It was getting hard to breathe, but she hadn't found Jack yet. My God, Vanessa, she thought. Who could have done that, and why? Where were those ambulances? I'm delirious, Rachel realized, but I have to find Jack. Forcing herself to her feet, she swept the room with the flashlight as she had before. The beam caught the zombies, frozen in their feeding frenzy. It also illuminated their unfortunate victim, Todd Winkle. I have to get out of here, Rachel thought, stifling another scream. She fought to keep her breathing shallow. Another outburst and she'd collapse. And she couldn't go back. She couldn't bear seeing Vanessa's savagely decapitated head, so she kept moving forward. Now she was just trying to escape, but in her trembling hands the flashlight no longer shined simply straight ahead. Instead, the beam scoured the room as if of its own accord. Out of the corner of her eye, Rachel glimpsed something amiss near Dracula's crypt. She knew she shouldn't look, but something inside of her compelled her. She thought she heard a tiny, "I told you so," float from the depths of her mind. Crumpled against the crypt was the body of Van McBride. Blood ran out of 2 holes in his neck. More blood ran down from a bruise on his forehead. His tongue, black and swollen, protruded from his mouth. Dark bruises ringed his forearms like tattoos. Tearing her gaze away, she reached for the door to the next room. But what would she find there? She asked herself. Another body? Jack's body? She had to know. To give up now would be like swimming halfway across the English Channel and turning back. Her own laughter was tinged with insanity. Somehow she found herself enjoying this real-life house of horrors. Maybe I'll find the next room empty, she thought. Maybe I'll be the next person to permanently inhabit this gruesome menagerie. "Let's do it!" she shouted, and burst into the next room. Her flashlight found Elvis immediately, and he was smiling broadly and wetly. Only it wasn't the Elvis robot, and he wasn't smiling. Ron Marchant sat in the king's place, his smile the grotesque curve of a razor cut circumscribing his throat. The blood dripping onto his feet gave him one purple suede shoe. "I guess Elvis has left the building," she commented drunkenly. Her attention was riveted on the horrible scene until a clicking sound to her right distracted her. Turning, she shined the flashlight. Against the far door, alive, sat Jack. At her head, he pointed a rifle. Chapter 11. At the sight of Jack and the gun barrel, Rachel's mind immediately became sharp. "Jack!" she yelled, but made no move toward him. "It's me, Rachel!" A large purple bruise decorated Jack's forehead. Looking confused, he kept holding the gun up. The barrel weaved slightly. Rachel realized that he was probably even groggier than she was. She edged toward him. "It's Rachel, Jack. There's a gas leak. We have to leave." He lowered the barrel and stared at her as if still unsure of her identity. He started to cry. Wrapping her arms around him, Rachel carefully pushed the gun away from him. He was my best friend," Jack sobbed. Rachel looked back up at Ron. I'm sorry, John," she said soothingly. "Do you know what happened? There are others." While she spoke, Rachel tried to help him to his feet. Vanessa, Todd Winkle, Van McBride. Stumbling to his feet, Jack spoke their names as if in eulogy. "And Ron." He started to break down again, then stopped abruptly. Wide-eyed, he turned to Rachel, as if about to tell her an important secret. I think I might have done it," he confided to her seriously. "I'm really not that well, you know, in the head. I was institutionalized for a while. Ron knew that. That's why he was such a big help to me." "You didn't kill anyone," Rachel told him as she directed him back the way she had come. They would both have to keep from looking at any of the bodies. I remember falling," Jack babbled as they staggered through the room. "But when I woke up, I was upstairs, in a closed section of the mansion, and when I came to the ballroom, everyone was gone." "The power went out," Rachel reminded him. They had passed Van's body without looking and were now entering the zombie room. "Now there's a gas leak." Did I do all this?" he asked, gesturing to where Todd's body lay, a feast for zombies. I found the gun here." He suddenly became frantic. I almost killed you with it." "It's okay," Rachel told him. "You didn't know who I was." "But for the last few hours, I didn't even know who I was. So, maybe—" Jack's voice trailed off as they entered the executioner room. Avoiding Vanessa's head would be difficult. "Keep looking at the floor," she warned Jack, "and keep moving. And you didn't kill anyone," she added. But now she wasn't sure. Maybe Jack was a lot less stable than he had let on earlier. He didn't seem dangerous now, but... Rachel mentally slapped herself. It was the gas. The gas was making Jack confess to crimes he had not committed, and it was making her paranoid. Despite her best efforts, her mind looped back. Was the gas deluding Jack, or making him tell the truth? All internal discussion stopped when the mummy entered the room brandishing an axe. "He's mine!" the mummy called out and attacked. The axe split the air between Jack and Rachel. It would have divested them of the arms they had linked together, but at the last minute Rachel pushed Jack away from her. He flew to one side, she fell the opposite way. The axe whooshed through the space they had occupied only moments before. By the way the mummy overcompensated on the follow-through, Rachel could tell that it too wasn't immune to the effects of the gas. The fallen flashlight cast an eerie twilight throughout the room. Rachel watched the mummy recover its balance, then pull to its full height and stare down at Jack. Jack looked up, stunned and helpless. The mummy's right hand gripped the axe tightly. Jack was a goner, unless she acted fast. "Leave him alone!" Rachel shouted. Big mistake. The mummy whirled around. "Tonight's my dream come true," said the mummy. It was purposely distorting its speaking voice so Rachel could not tell if it was male or female. Still, the voice sounded familiar. Savoring the terror it was causing, the mummy approached Rachel, who shrank back behind the executioner. The mummy quickly swept Vanessa's head aside. "You don't think I'm gonna let you ruin it for me, do you?" Rachel was trying to push the robot at the mummy, but the thing wouldn't budge. Her only hope was that the space was too cramped for the mummy to have a good shot with the axe. "I've been dreaming and planning and dreaming," the mummy continued. "He was even helping me until he betrayed me. Even then my dreams and plans were coming true." "Who was trying to help you?" Rachel asked. She needed to buy time. "I have said my piece," the mummy announced demurely, not taking the bait. Its speech pattern was maddeningly familiar. The mummy raised the axe. Despite Rachel's efforts, she was still an easy target. Suddenly there came a dull, wet thump, and the mummy's head lunged forward. Without thinking, Rachel kicked out, hoping to knock the axe from the mummy's hand. But instead she kicked the mummy in the stomach. As the mummy flew backward, the axe came down, barely missing Rachel's leg. Then Jack grabbed the mummy by the wrist and threw the costume murderer toward the entrance. "Come on," said a suddenly revitalized Jack, grabbing Rachel's hand and yanking her out from behind the executioner. "You would hurt me?" the mummy yelled as it stood, its voice trembling with rage and muffled. One hand still held the axe. The other rubbed the back of its head where Jack had struck. Without answering the mummy, Jack dragged Rachel through the door back into the haunted mansion. "What did you hit him with?" Rachel asked. "You don't want to know," Jack told her gravely. Rachel knew the answer instantly, and in fact had known the answer before she asked the question, because as they left she had noticed that Vanessa's head was missing from the executioner's grasp. Before they reached the other side of the zombie room, the first door flew open and the mummy appeared. "If I can't have you, no one will," it shouted with rage, and hurled the axe at them. Jack pushed Rachel into the next room and drove in himself, just as the axe struck the door. The blade cut through the door, nearly splitting it in two. "Keep going!" Jack shouted at Rachel, who was transfixed by the blade of the axe that had nearly killed them twice. "We have to get the gun!" This time the mummy was not as quick to follow them, and they made it safely to the Elvis room. "Look for the gun," Jack told her. "But be careful. I had the hammer cocked and it's loaded." At first they searched futilely in the dark. But then Rachel turned on her emergency lights, which gave them just enough light to find the rifle. It was right where Rachel had left it, near the far door. She handed the rifle gingerly to Jack, who checked the hammer and pointed it toward the door through which they had just come. "That sucker takes one step into this room, he's really going to need some bandages." Rachel looked at Jack, astonished. Minutes ago he had been simpering. Now he possessed all his faculties, and more than a little bit of rage. It looked like the adrenaline rush, which she had felt when he had pointed the gun at her, had worked its wonders on him as well. The door leading to the vampire room began to swing open. "One more step and I'm giving you central air," Jack warned, sighting down the barrel of the rifle. The mummy just stood in the doorway, holding the axe. It took a step forward. "I'm warning you," Jack said, his finger trembling on the trigger. The mummy took another step forward. "That's it," Jack said, and began to squeeze the trigger. "Wait!" Rachel screamed, before he could pull off a shot. The urgency in her voice froze even the mummy. "The gas! It just occurred to me. If you fire, you'll ignite the gas. We might blow up." Jack looked at Rachel, then down at the gun. She was right, he realized. The flash from the gunpowder would create an inferno around them. They had trumped themselves. The mummy knew it, and started forward. "And something else occurred to me," Rachel said in the same urgent tone. She pointed at the mummy. "It's you, Maria, under the mask, isn't it?" The mummy staggered back as if struck. Then, pulling itself up to full height, it reached up a hand and yanked off the mask. Maria's dark hair spilled out. "Knowing the truth won't save you," she told them defiantly. Rachel almost laughed. "That's how I knew," she told them. "The melodramatic lines, especially, 'If I can't have him, no one will.' No offense, Maria, but your delivery is a little arch." The rage in Maria's eyes could have lit up the room. She held up the axe. "Mock me at your own peril." "I rest my case," Rachel said, aware that she was taking an enormous chance. "Look, you're going to kill us both, like everyone else, so—" "Not both," Maria interrupted. "Not necessarily." "Because I'm yours, right?" Jack ventured to ask. "And I'm yours," Maria responded. "I've been a fan since Nuthouse started, and I knew that one day I would be in it. You were my inspiration to study acting." Maria frowned. "But they canceled Nuthouse and took you away from me for a while. Then the dreams began. They told me you were returning, and that you were returning for me. The dreams even told me about Ron, who was going to introduce us." "So you dreamed all of this?" Jack asked dubiously. "Yes, and it all came true. You returned. I spoke to Ron, who claimed to have had the same dreams, so he said he would help. But there were so many betrayers, ones who would hurt you. They needed to be dealt with. For you, for us." Jack was horrified. "So you killed these people for me? Did you kill them?" Maria's smile was one of pride in the job well done. "They were all going to hurt you." But Ron." "Yeah, but Ron," Rachel said. "Ron was Jack's friend." Maria's smile turned into a snarl almost instantly. "He was the biggest betrayer of all. He would have taken Jack away from me for good." The smile returned. "Now nothing stands in our way. You'll take me back to Hollywood under your tutelage, and we'll be one of the great Hollywood teams. Tracy and Hepburn, Astaire and Rogers, Burton and Taylor." Her eyes glittered with possibility. "Spyder and Saccotti?" Jack wondered aloud. "Bye," he said quickly, and without warning grabbed Rachel by the hand and started running. They went through the door, and Jack immediately leapt up on the platform. Behind them, Maria screamed with rage. "She's nuts!" Jack shouted to Rachel. "Here, help me push this robot down. Maybe we can block the door." But as soon as he touched the Freddy Krueger robot, something fell from it and hit the floor like a bag of sand. "It's Repeat!" Rachel cried, backing away. From the looks of things, he had been impaled by the robot's upraised claw. The door from the Elvis room opened about 4 inches, then stopped against Repeat's body, which had fallen in front of it. The axe waved wildly through the crack in the door. Then it was replaced by Maria's face pressed against the opening. "I'm coming for both of you now. Laugh at me, will you? Not while I have the means to cut you down to size." To emphasize her statement, she showed off the axe once more. Then with a grunt she threw her weight into the door. attempting to shoulder it open. Repeat's body slid a few more inches, but she could still not enter. "Come on, Rachel!" Jack yelled. "Back here!" Rachel turned toward his voice just as Maria thumped against the door again. One more try and she would gain entry. Reaching out, Rachel allowed Jack to pull her toward the back of the platform, where a darker area in the wall indicated the passageway. They were about to duck into it when Maria screamed. Jack and Rachel turned just in time to see the axe fall from Maria's hand onto the floor. Her body thumped against the door again, but this time it was as if another force had thrown her, an incredibly strong force. The door swung open, pushing Repeat's body aside as if it were a feather pillow. Maria careened off the opening door and landed to the side of the doorway. Then a large figure strode casually through. Jack recovered from his shock more quickly than Rachel. "Ron!" he cried at the bloody half-Elvis who had just entered. "I thought you were a dead man!" "Dead? Me?" Ron asked, smiling brightly and lethally. Rachel thought. Jack was struggling to pull free of her, but she held his hand tightly, knowing that if she let go, he would die. "Actually, dude," Ron chuckled, "I am dead." The words hit Jack like buckshot. "Stop kidding around," Jack said nervously. "This evening is too freaky for you to joke like this." "Oh, I'm sorry," Ron said, as if he had been extremely rude. He looked down at himself. "I still have my costume on, don't I?" Subtly, Ron's voice was changing. It was becoming more deeper, more guttural. "Let me take off this mask. It's getting hard to breathe in it anyway." His voice was now totally changed. It had become monstrous. In the dim, available light, Jack and Rachel watched aghast as Ron brought a hand up to the slash in his throat. "Ron?" Jack started, but fell silent when his friend ignored him completely, digging his fingers into the wound across his throat. A wet tearing sound followed, as Ron peeled his face off, much like Jack had done earlier with his latex Phantom of the Opera makeup. Only this was not makeup. Ron tore off his own face. Beneath it resided the face of a monster, wet with blood, surrounded by a tattered frame of flesh. A burn-scarred creature leered out at them. "Trick or treat!" growled Freddy Krueger. Chapter 12. This time it was Rachel who acted without warning. With the hand that had so desperately been holding on to Jack, she pulled him into the passageway behind the exhibit. She caught a glimpse of Krueger's face as they fled. He watched them with devilish amusement. "Where does this go?" she barked at Jack, who seemed stunned. Back in the room, Krueger started laughing. The sound filled the passageway, surrounded them, threatening to drive them mad. "Around the outside of the rooms, back to the top of the ballroom staircase," he finally answered, and took the lead. "What was that?" he asked desperately. "Are we hallucinating? Has the gas gotten to us?" "I don't think so," Rachel told him. What they had seen was beyond comprehension, but she did not doubt its reality. "We have to get into a car and drive out of here. You still have the rifle?" "Yeah, for whatever good it will do us against that." "Maybe," Rachel responded. "But if we can get outside, when we get outside," she corrected herself, "we may get a chance. Are you any good?" "Actually, yeah. I went to firing ranges all the time in L.A. "Maybe the rifle won't be effective against Krueger, but it's better than nothing." What was Freddy Krueger, and could he be killed? Somehow Rachel didn't think so. But there must be a way for them to escape, or by now, no one in Springwood would be left alive. No teens, at least. "Here we go," Jack said, pointing out the exit. They emerged on the landing opposite the entrance to the haunted mansion. Taking the stairs two at a time, they ran down into the ballroom. If they reached the exit, they were home free. But Freddy Krueger appeared at the ballroom entrance. He had carved off the remainder of Ron's skin, but ribbons of flesh still clung to the tattered, striped sweater he wore. Leaning against the doorway as if without a care in the world, Freddy addressed the gleaming blades of the claw at the end of one hand.
"What? No last dance? I was really looking forward to cutting the rug."
With the metallic clicking, Freddy scissored the blades together several times in rapid succession. Jack and Rachel froze, trying to decide what to do next. Luckily, Freddy didn't seem like he was in any hurry to dispose of them, though he did turn and face them.
"Homecoming turn into a bit of a nightmare?"
he asked Jack. Turning to Rachel, he asked,
"Your reunion with your dreamy old boyfriend, not so dreamy."
He started to walk slowly toward them. His claw dropped to his side. They backed up, each eyeing possible exits. Freddy saw them and was amused.
"Maybe you can get out that way,"
he teased, pointing with the claw.
"Or maybe that way."
Each time he reached out, they jumped, further amusing Freddy.
"Poor Maria had been dreaming about meeting the famous Jack Spyder since she first laid eyes on you. And with my help, she managed to keep her obsession hidden for quite some time. So when things didn't work out the way they had in her dreams, can you blame her for getting a little out of sorts?"
"You manipulated her?" Rachel asked. Freddy snarled.
"Don't get the idea you're buying time, little girl. Any time you have left, I'm giving to you."
He gave her a withering stare, then smiled grotesquely.
"I manipulated all of you. She was the easiest because she was off balance. Then there was your friend, Ron, who had planned such a nice little coup."
At Jack's look of disbelief, Freddy laughed.
"Oh, he was no more your friend than a black widow, my little spider. I'm sure he'll be happy to tell you all about his scheming when you join him in my boiler room, because that's where you're going, straight to hell."
With that, he lunged forward, swiping at them with his blades. They jumped back, but did not run.
"Just seeing if you were on your toes," Freddy laughed. "Ron has been mine since late this past summer. He was sleeping on the job, which is a bad idea around a gas leak. It's the kind of thing that you don't normally wake up from, if you know what I mean."
He chuckled sinisterly.
"But I must admit, it's been a gas to be Ron all this time."
Rachel was stunned. According to what Freddy was saying, he'd been guiding events leading up to this evening's massacre for months, and all the while he had been inhabiting Ron's body. "We can't win," she whispered softly to herself. Freddy, who had driven them into the center of the ballroom, smiled.
"Now that's the spirit."
He held up his gleaming talons.
"Time to give Freddy his treat."
His voice was low, seductive, but still horrible. He reached forward, holding his claws point up underneath her chin. But Jack had other plans. Taking advantage of Freddy's distraction, he flipped the rifle so he was holding the muzzle and quickly swung it at Freddy's claw. The butt of the rifle struck Freddy's wrist, nearly shattering as it drove his hand downward. Freddy roared with rage. In another deft move, Jack grabbed the gun forward, nailing Freddy in the stomach. He doubled over, but before Jack could pull the rifle away, Freddy's unclawed hand shot out, grabbing the rifle in the center. His fingers quickly worked their way toward the trigger. The muzzle of the rifle now pointed directly at Jack's chest. Freddy's gnarled finger squeezed the trigger. Jack braced for impact. But nothing happened. The safety was on. At that moment, Rachel overcame her paralysis. With all of her might, she drove her foot into Freddy's side. By reflex, his hand dropped away from the rifle and clutched what should have been broken ribs. But Rachel had no such hope that she had caused that much damage. She only knew that Jack could now pull the rifle free of Freddy. "Take it!" she yelled. He immediately yanked the rifle away and the two ran off. They both knew that they had to get out of the house immediately. If Freddy didn't get them, the gas would soon. It was only by sheer force of will that they had survived this long, but their will was fading. It suffered a further blow when they heard Freddy bellow with rage. He spoke no words, but simply roared furiously. If he caught them again, there would be no more facetious smiles, no more grandiose toying. In that sound, both Rachel and Jack heard the promise of their own painful deaths. Still, they made it to the front door, and outside, the fresh air seemed to sharpen their minds immediately. Acting quickly, John locked the house from the outside. The steel-lined hardwood security door would prove at least an obstacle to Freddy in his pursuit, and there was no question he was pursuing them. A series of crashes, large items being flung outside, marked Freddy's progress through the mansion. From about 100 yards across the lawn, they heard the sounds of Freddy attempting to break through the door. They turned and faced the mansion. "If we try to run, we won't make it," Jack said. Rachel nodded. There seemed to be no real escape. The realization was the downside of their new clarity of mind. Inside, brains clouded by a lack of oxygen, they had found some reason to hope. Now there was none. Even the sight of her car nearby gave her no hope of escape. They could drive away, but Freddy, now unleashed, would follow, and bring destruction along with him. Thunderous booms emanated from the front door. Even from a distance, its buckling was obvious, and in the next moment, with a tremendous crack, the door exploded forward, and framed within the doorway was the menacing figure of Freddy. Jack dropped to his knees and flicked off the safety of the rifle. He drew a bead and fired. Freddy jerked slightly, but did not fall. "I hit him," Jack said hopelessly. "Maybe if I hit him in the face." His eyes narrowed in determination, and he pulled off another shot. This one fell short, striking the wreckage of the door. As the bullet careened off the steel reinforcement, sending off a tiny spark, Rachel got an idea. Jack squeezed off another shot. This one appeared to hit Freddy in the left shoulder, but it only slowed the monster. "Jack," Rachel said, as he took aim again, "I have an idea of how to stop Freddy, but you may end up losing everything in the process." He looked at her, trying to read her mind, but failing. In the distance, Freddy marched forward, inexorably. "Will it get me killed?" he asked matter-of-factly. "I don't think so." He considered her uncertainty, then fired at Freddy again. This time he seemed to hit the monster squarely in the chest, driving him back several feet. He was still within 30 feet of the front door. "Will it get you killed?" he asked much more seriously. "I hope not," Rachel replied. "Then do it," Jack decided quickly. "I'm not going to be able to hold him off much longer." "What's the plan?" Jack asked, not taking his eyes off Freddy. His slow, deliberate movements reminded Jack of Godzilla wading through Tokyo. The gun he held amounted to a pea shooter against this monster. The sound of a car engine revving to life reminded him that Rachel had never given him an answer. The sound of tires spinning in dirt made him turn. In her car, Rachel took off like a shot, steering straight for Freddy. Damn, Jack thought. She's going to try and run him down. That'll kill her for sure. There was only one thing to do. Rapid firing. He rained bullets on Freddy. If he scored enough hits, the monster might be momentarily driven back into the mansion. And if so, maybe Rachel would abandon her suicide mission. After the fourth rapid shot, his part of the plan seemed to be working. Freddy was forced almost back into the doorway. But Rachel did not slow down. Freddy saw the oncoming car and spread his arms wide, almost welcoming it. That's when Rachel dove out of the car, as it sped on a collision course toward Krueger. She rolled across the grass on a divergent path. First, the underside of the car raked against the steel of the door. Then the entire vehicle leapt into the air, carrying with it a shower of sparks. Freddy's hands flew up in an effort to protect himself, rather than welcoming the oncoming juggernaut. The front bumper caught him squarely in the chest, and the last Jack saw of Freddy Krueger was the monster being thrown backwards through the doorway of the mansion. That was also the last Jack saw of his mansion. The sparks that flew along with the car bounced into the entrance, even as the car plowed into it. Later, he would never be able to say whether it was the sparks alone, or if the impact ruptured the car's gas tank. Whatever the cause, the gas inside the mansion ignited. The first explosion knocked Jack backwards about 20 feet. The second, third, and fourth explosions proceeded to level the mansion. Jack was driven farther and farther back, finally taking refuge behind one of the remaining cars on his lawn. One explosion rocked the vehicle so violently, Jack thought it would topple over onto him. Then the rain of fiery debris began. At first, he crawled under the car to avoid being struck. Then he remembered that Rachel was out there somewhere unprotected. Running toward the column of flames and smoke that had only minutes before been his childhood home, Jack began searching for Rachel. The heat was searing, nearly driving him back, but he forced himself onward, toward where he had last seen her. She had been impossibly close to the house. Jack feared the worst. Flaming wreckage seemed to cover the entire yard. In the distance, he could see a fire already beginning in the woods. His face felt sunburned. He almost walked past Rachel. In her black bodysuit, she was nearly impossible to spot. Only the lighter skin of her hands alerted Jack to her location. He found her farther from the house than he had expected. Then he realized that the force of the blast must have flung her away as it had him. She was lying face down, unconscious, but breathing. Turning her over carefully, he brushed the hair from her face. Cradling her for several minutes, he strained to listen for sirens. An explosion that big would surely be noticed in town, and the glowing column of smoke would be impossible to miss. Jack hoped Rachel would be all right, until the authorities arrived. Rachel dreamed of camping. She sat on a log in front of a tremendous bonfire. With her were Maria and Repeat. Across the fire on another log sat Vanessa and Ron. Beside them sat Todd and Van. They were all roasting marshmallows, only the fire was much too hot. The marshmallows were burning, dropping like molten nuggets into the flames. Then their clothing started to catch on fire. They beat at the flames, trying to extinguish them, but to no avail. Vanessa and Ron became human torches, as did the rest of the gathering. All except Rachel. Rachel could feel the heat, but was otherwise unaffected by it. Around her, the others were dancing grotesque jigs as they were consumed. Finally, one by one, Maria, Repeat, Todd, Van, Vanessa, and Ron all cast themselves into the infernal bonfire, which reached to the sky. For a moment, Rachel was alone. Then suddenly, Freddy Krueger sat beside her. Each talon had impaled a marshmallow, sandwiched between 2 graham crackers and a square of milk chocolate. "You can't be here," Rachel insisted. "I figured it out when I saw the spark. That mansion was filled with enough gas to blow you back to where you came from." Freddy laughed, then thrust his entire hand into the fire.
"You haven't beaten me," he snarled quietly. "Don't kid yourself."
Withdrawing his hand from the fire, he brandished the razors at her. They glowed white hot. Waving them under her nose, she could smell the toasted graham cracker mingling with the scent of chocolate and marshmallows.
"Freddy will always be back for s'mores!"
Then he started laughing, first as a low rumble, then building to a crescendo of madness. Her eyes snapped open. Jack was hovering over her. His lips moved, but he made no sound. In fact, she could hear nothing. Jack seemed to be saying, "You did it," over and over. Rachel turned her head slightly. White-hot pain shot up her spine. But she saw the mansion, or what was left of it. The building had exploded as she had planned, and now resembled the bonfire of her dream. Or had it been simply another delusion? But several things immediately became more clear. Both she and Jack had survived the blast. The explosion had made her deaf, and, according to the words forming on Jack's lips, she had done it. Within the week, Rachel's hearing returned. although she would have to learn to live with a head full of ringing noises. And although she had suffered no other major injuries, Jack had come through almost entirely unscathed. Her body remained bruised for a long time afterwards. But had she done it? Had she disposed of Freddy Krueger? The memory of her dream returned often. He said he'd be back for s'mores. And he wasn't talking about chocolate marshmallow graham cracker sandwiches. She was sure of that. Freddy Krueger would be back for more. Epilogue.
That was quite the housewarming Rachel gave Jack, eh? Even though I had to cut my Halloween round short, I still managed to fill my bag with plenty of treats. The good news is that I can eat them all at once, and I won't get a stomach ache. Ha ha ha! Ron, Vanessa, Repeat Maria, Todd, and Van. I've collected all their sweet souls. But down here in the boiler room, you might not recognize them right off. You see, they've removed their human disguises. Each one now appears in his or her true form. Ron, for example, has a place of his own, wallowing in the muddy water of the terrarium. The blood-sucking leech he's always been. His parasitic soulmate, Vanessa, buzzes around the terrarium as a hungry mosquito. The hapless duo of Todd and Van scavenges cockroaches, where filth and garbage are now their riches. Also joining them is the bitter Repeat, who has shed his human form to become a fly on the wall of the terrarium. Nothing that happens within the terrarium escapes his notice, but to his frustration, he has no one to tell. You might think that compared to some others who have joined me in the boiler room, this group has it pretty easy. What could be less pressured than simply being yourself throughout eternity? The terrarium isn't exactly a stress-free environment, though. Outside it sits a large, hungry crow. It doesn't see a terrarium. It sees a smorgasbord. Ha 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 ha! So there it sits, pecking constantly, eyeing the morsels contained within, especially the juicy leech. The denizens of the terrarium will spend eternity in fear, just because some crow, Maria, of course, likes them just the way they are. Quote the raven, evermore. So ends this chilling tale of terror. And in the spirit of the holiday, I wish a scary Halloween to all, and to all a good fright.
Alright, this has been Freddy Krueger's Tales of Terror, Deadly Disguise by David Bergantino. And I gotta say, guys, I really enjoyed this book. It was short and sweet, but you know what? It worked so well. There was no need for a bunch of filler. We got started at the party, and it was balls to the wall. It just floored it, and I really enjoyed that about this book. It didn't pull any punches. It didn't slow down. It had a steady pace throughout the entire book. It pulled me into the characters. Even though we got very little backstory, it was enough backstory to make it intriguing about all these people wanting to double-cross Jack and things like that. And it really kept me guessing on who the big bad really was, who it was that was possessed by Freddy. I thought it was going to be Maria. The whole time I thought, but instead it's just that Freddy was manipulating her. So I guess Freddy was, I guess if she was dreaming, Freddy was, controlling her, and that's why she sounded like him when she killed a couple of the people, which that's pretty cool. I actually dig that. And the fact that we thought Ron was dead, and that really drilled it home to me that Maria was the one possessed, but then all of a sudden he kills Maria, and Ron was never dead. Well, Ron was dead to begin with, but Freddy was inside of him and pulled the whole Freddy's Revenge from Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2. But yeah, guys, you can tell how much I enjoyed the book, and I thought David did a great job implementing the whole Nightmare on Elm Street 2 aspect. Also, I thought the kills were very creative and inventive, and they were fresh and fun. I know it's a young adult novel, so he couldn't take it too far, but I thought the gore factor was pretty cool. And the mansion blowing up at the end was pretty badass. And he said in interviews that he wasn't allowed to use Freddy until the very end of the book. And, you know, Freddy's only there in the flesh for like 14 pages. But, man, his presence is felt so well, and it's so well written. I forgot that Freddy hadn't been in the book before those last 14 pages. So, very good job to the author, David Bergantino, on making a really good use of those 14 pages he got to use Freddy in. Well, guys, like I said, you know how much I like it, but I want to hear what you guys think of this book in the comment section below. I'm excited about doing the other 5 books in the Freddy Krueger's Tales of Terror series. Are you guys looking forward to those books now that you've got the taste of the series with Deadly Disguise? Can't wait to hear from you guys. And I'll be back very soon with more slasher audiobooks here on the YouTube channel. Until then, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian,
And Freddy saying
thanks for listening, guys, and
pleasant screams.
I didn't know